All right, Tara, we're live. Well, Tara, I think you're muted. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tara Rodriguez, Director of the Division of School and Program Improvement at the Kentucky Department of Education. Nice to be with you this afternoon. And we have two other presenters.
I am David Melanti, the Assistant Director in the Division of School and Program Improvement.
Hey, it's Brenda Considine, and I'm the Title I Branch Manager. It's good to see everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. I just wanted to explain why we had to change our meeting time. We had a special board meeting this morning, and it was at the same time as our webinar, so we had to be flexible, and I hope this new time was acceptable to everybody. Let me go ahead and share my slides with you. Remember that if somebody was not able to attend the live webinar for whatever reason, they are recorded and will be posted on our Title I documents and resources webpage. It usually takes a day or two, depending on how many other things we've got to do. So if you have a question during the webinar, please send those to me in an email, and we'll make every attempt to answer those during the call if we can. If we can't, we will make sure to follow up with you afterwards. And as I said, the webinar will be recorded and posted. So just to recap a little bit from our May webinar, we discussed during that webinar the Title I application in GMAP, questions from the April webinar, which people had sent in during the call. And then we also talked about some upcoming training and technical assistance opportunities. On today's call, we'll be looking at some more updates and reminders. And then David and Brenda will talk about allowable costs and the allowability process. And then I'm going to respond to another district question that had to do with parent and family engagement ideas and allowable expenditures. So Brenda, I think you're up next if you want to go ahead and talk about GMAP.
Absolutely, Tara, thanks. I know that you are working on your Title I Part A application in the consolidated application. And just a reminder that the FY21 due date for that is June 30th, and that will require you to have all sections completed for each federal grant that you are able to receive for the 2021 year. And once those are completed, you can submit that application to KDE. And then once that is submitted, your consultant will provide you some feedback regarding that application process. And once that feedback is submitted, you may have to do some additional work at the district level in order to get approval. And just remember that funding is not going to be released to the district until every section of that federal grant receives an okay. Also, I wanted to make sure you know that if you have any program-related questions with GMAP, you can, and you're struggling resolving it, if you will check on the help link, help for the current page, sometimes that's very helpful. If you're unable to resolve it that way, you might want to click on the KDE resources link that is over in the navigation window in GMAP. And if you're still having trouble at that point, click on Contact KDE, and there's a feedback form that you can submit to get some GMAP help. And also, we have realized that if you are having some issues, some technical issues utilizing GMAP, if you are working in Internet Explorer, it is not always as compatible as your browser. So if you would possibly use Microsoft Edge or Firefox, Safari, or Chrome, those would be actually more accessible, and you would find it to be more compatible with GMAP. That's about all I have for GMAP updates and due dates.
And Brenda, when you're talking about
Yes.
the browser, I remember that a district had sent us a question about what we've said in the past about how you can have two different browsers open. You can have your checklist open on one and the application open on the other. So you can look at the application and work on, at the checklist and work on the application. And a district had said they weren't able to save. So we did reach out, David reached out to the vendor, and they confirmed that yes, that should work. I wonder if the district might try not using Explorer as one of those two browsers, if perhaps that would help. But if not,
to try.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and if not, we can continue to look into that.
Yes, so make sure if you are going to use the the double monitors, I would make sure that I was in a browser that's compatible with GMAP, and those were Edge, Firefox, Safari, and Chrome.
Okay.
That's about all I have.
Having this issue again with, okay. Sorry about that. I'm probably going to have to open this up again. Okay. Brenda, can you still hear me?
I've got you.
Okay, good. All right. So you had talked about this one, and we're on allowable costs.
Yes, I think it's for David next.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going to take this part. So we're going to talk a little bit about allowable costs. And as you may know, Title I and other federal programs operate under a couple different sets of statutes and regulations. You have your programmatic statute and regulations, which lays out your requirements for each program, but you also have operational regulations that direct how you have to operate under federal programs. So I just want to kind of let you know that what I present here applies also to other federal programs, but we're going to kind of frame it in Title I terms here today. So under Title I, as you know, costs have to be deemed allowable under the Title I program, and that means that costs must benefit eligible students. That kind of differs from school-wide to targeted assistance, where in a school-wide, for example, all students can benefit from services, and targeted assistance, you have identified students that have to be provided services. In targeted assistance, those identified students are your lowest achieving students. Costs have to be permissible under the Title I program. For example, a school operating a target or a school-wide program should be able to demonstrate that Title I expenditures are consistent with the school's needs assessment. In addition, costs must be deemed necessary and reasonable. Let's go to the next slide, Tara. So for federal programs, including Title I and other programs, required written procedures have to be developed at both the state level and at the district level for how you are going to evaluate expenditures to ensure that they meet programmatic requirements and standards. That principle is outlined in Uniform Grant Guidance, which this is a live link that will take you to the guidance. Again, the Uniform Grant Guidance is the operational side of federal programs. It tells you how you have to operate and additional things that you have to have in place, such as time and effort, record keeping, and so on. So each district should have on file written allowability procedures. again, required under the Code of Federal Regulations, which is the Uniform Grant Guidance. There are several things that your allowability procedures should address. Number one, it has to address whether expenditures are necessary, reasonable, and allocable. We'll talk about definitions for those in just a minute. There has to be adequate documentation for expenditures. Those expenditures have to conform with federal law and grant terms. Must be consistent with state and local policies as well. And they have to be consistently treated. So you see there, a cost may not be assigned to a federal award as a direct cost if any other cost incurred for the same purpose in like circumstances has been allocated as an indirect cost. So you can charge indirect cost and direct cost at the same time. However, you cannot double charge for costs is what that means. So they either have to be categorized as direct cost or indirect cost. And an indirect cost would be something that is really difficult to track back to a single program area. That may be, you may share, for example, utilities costs with programs, and that could be charged indirectly. Because it is really difficult to charge how much or what proportion of those utilities go back to the operation of a federal program individually. You have to use generally accepted accounting principles, and you have to ensure that costs are shared proportionately across programs, and if matching is used, it has to be specifically allowable within programmatic statute regulation or guidance that USAID has provided in the past. We can go to the next one. So what does reasonable mean? It means not excessive in cost and based on prudent and sound purchasing practices. So a couple guiding questions for you. Number one, does the cost seem reasonable in comparison to other examples I've encountered? And what examples can I provide to an auditor to document the cost was reasonable? So, if you are using purchasing state purchasing requirements and you are getting bids on items, or you are shopping around to make sure that you get the best bang for your buck, and that does not necessarily mean you're always going to purchase the lowest priced item. You are purchasing an item that best meets your needs and is reasonable in cost. If you're using measures like that to ensure you're getting the best bang for your buck, you are meeting this component. To give you an example of this, a couple of years ago, I had a district call me and wanted to spend about $10,000 on a notebook cart. And the first thing I did was I went to Google and just searched prices for notebook carts and found that carts could be purchased for considerably less than what they wanted to purchase one for. So we, many times when our consultants are evaluating costs within your applications, they are going to do some of the same things. They're going to do a little bit of research to figure out whether or not this cost is actually a reasonable cost. So that's reasonable. Let's go to the next slide. A cost has to be deemed necessary, and that is, it is essential for carrying out the needs-based Title I Part A program. So again, a couple guiding questions for you. Could the cost be deemed necessary for the operation of a quality, efficient Title I program? Our consultants, as they come out to monitor, are going to take a look at expenditures, and we'll ask some follow-up questions about expenditures and how they meet this particular component. Is the need for the cost supported in the needs assessment, CDIP, CSIP, a statement in the GMAP application, or another needs assessment format? We know that sometimes a CDIP does not, a CSIP does not always capture every need. So we might be looking at other needs assessment formats such as committee meetings. We might look at more detailed notes from administrative meetings. Somewhere, in order to have an allowable cost, it has to be documented as a need. Lots of times we follow up with that question, what is the need for this particular item, when you send us a question or if we see it in your application. So we do, train our folks to ask questions like that on the follow-up when we get requests for technical assistance. And then again, what examples could I provide to any auditor to document that that cost is necessary? Okay, allocable is a longer one. It states that the cost is incurred specifically for the benefit of the program. That includes student, teachers, and parents, particularly in Title I. It's distributed proportionately and an allowable activity and meets the program's intent. So the intent of Title I Part A is not to serve your your poverty children, but is to serve the low achieving students. So a few guiding questions. Does the cost meet the intent of the Title I program? Okay, serving low achieving students first and foremost. What does guidance, statute, and regulation or uniform guidance say about the allowability of this cost? For example, in the operational regulations, student activity costs such as clubs would not be an allowable cost. The third bullet, is the cost incurred proportionately by the program to provide needed support? And a good example of this is if a program pays 100% of the cost, that program must receive 100% of the benefit and can pay for 100% of that cost. So we have situations where, for example, costs might be shared between two programs. Maybe 50% paid with Title I, 50% paid with Title II. So each of those programs must benefit no more than 50% from that particular cost, and each program has to share 50% of that cost. So that will be really critical when making decisions when sharing costs between programs. It is allowable to share costs, but again, benefit and cost must be shared proportionately. If, for example, two programs share the cost of a computer, for example, because let's say the district administrator who oversees those programs works half-time on those programs each. Again, 50% of that computer would have to be shared, or the cost, 50% would have to be shared between the two programs. And through time and effort documentation, it should be really easy for us to kind of compare how much those items are being used through the time and effort documentation. That should show 50% of cost within that program. Are Title I funds being used to meet requirements of other programs? So Title I funds explicitly cannot be used to meet the requirements of other federal programs and vice versa. So you cannot purchase something from Title I to benefit a requirement or to meet a requirement in another program. Is the category for this purchase listed in the 2021 KDE funding matrix chart and allowable munis codes in GMAP? So we're going to look for expenditures, particularly when monitoring. We're going to compare expenditures to the budget to see if number one, they're in allowable munis codes, and number two, that they are outlined in both GMAP and munis. If it's, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You finish. I'm
I
going
was
to
gonna say-
sidetrack here.
Yeah, that's okay. And if it's not listed, that may be because it is allocable. Now, we're going to show you where to find the funding matrix chart. The funding matrix chart is not the final decision maker in whether something is allowable or not. It is a tool for you to use to see where what allowable codes are, and to give you some additional definitions and guidance and information about some of those codes as well. Tara, did you want to go here?
Yeah, so let me see if I can pull this up. I sent in the email a direct link to the funding matrix chart. But if you want to, I'm going to show you how to get there just from this is the Title I webpage, but it's the same options up here on the top if you just go to the main KDE landing page. So you go up to District and School Report Support, go down to Grant Information. It's taking a little bit of time to get there. All right, you scroll down until you get to Federal Grants. And then we're going to scroll down again, and there's some other items we're going to take a look at here in a little bit, but you'll see here the funding matrix documents. And we mainly want to see, a lot of you probably already know about this, but for some of our newer coordinators, they might not have had the opportunity to find this yet. So here's the 2021 non-competitive, because Title I is a non-competitive grant, and it will download a spreadsheet for you. And what you'll see here are Munis object codes in this column. And you'll see over here along the top the different federal programs. So if we go over, Title I is this column right here. And you'll see information in each of those boxes that can either tell you, it can help you give some information about the allowability of something. As David mentioned, if it's not there, then maybe that's not something that's allowable. But it also tells you some things about maybe some extra information that would help you make that decision. So if we go down to, I'm going to look at code 610 and the one that's right after that has to do with food, because those are always a couple of areas where we have some questions. So 610 general supplies, and see here for Title I Part A, it explains a little bit about that code. It says it's not an appropriate code unless it's defined more clearly. So oftentimes if you have some funds in there, your consultant may ask you to explain a little more specifically what it is you want to purchase. So it gives you a little bit of information there. Another one is food. We oftentimes have questions about food. Again, it gives you a little information here. It explains that it's not generally allowable, but if there are food and beverage purchases, they have to meet the criteria defined in that United States Department of Education publication. And then it says you cannot purchase food for teachers. So it gives you a little information there about all kinds of different costs that you may be thinking about, and those are here in this chart, and we update those every year, and they're posted on the federal grants page for you.
I think, Tara, it's important to note also that those charts do sometimes change year to year, so object codes are sometimes added to those or taken out of those. So it's a good thing to familiarize yourself with, but it, again, is not the final decision-making tool in whether something is allowable. You have these other criteria which you have to really evaluate in order to be sure something is allowable. We can go to the next slide. So documented is the last component you kind of have to evaluate. Could you document that something is reasonable, necessary, and allocable through your allowability procedures? And how are you going to document what documentation you might maintain as part of that? You should be thinking about that as well. A lot of districts have standard purchasing processes within their policies and procedures. I think it should be noted that those generally do not meet what is required in this allowability process. So there may be some very general procedures and policies in place. However, federal requirements state that you have to really go beyond that in evaluating allowability. So really your approval of the Title I application signifies that we feel things meet federal statute and other regulatory requirements, and that funds may be spent on those items. We really train our staff to ask a lot of questions, particularly when things are a little bit vague within applications. So they will ask for clarification on those. They'll do that generally through the notes in the GMAP checklist. And that's, you know, we did a session on that a couple weeks ago, and that is vitally important to take a look at those notes when you are actually going back and responding to your returned application. We do require narratives in GMAP to explain the purposes of funds and identify schools that will be using those funds. We really want you to put in your narratives a good explanation. And we want you to really, if you're not breaking down costs by school, it is really helpful for us to kind of identify which schools will be using particular costs or will be receiving the benefit from services paid for in your GMAP application. Anything to add to that, Brenda or Tara?
No, I don't have anything.
No, I think you covered it really well, David. I do think that districts still have questions. They reach out to consultants a lot on, is this allowable? And it just helps to go over that from time to time.
Yeah, and we train our folks in these components as well. And that's why, you know, when you get questions about reasonable or necessary, they're kind of relying on an internal document very similar to these slides that we use to help guide them in GMAP evaluation.
Well, it does not look like we have any questions that have come through yet. So if you all don't have anything else to add, we'll move on to the next slide. All right, so this kind of piggybacks on what Brenda and David have been talking about. Earlier, Brenda mentioned that all sections of the consolidated application, not just the Title I section, but all grant applications that you're completing have to be approved with an OK before your district can access Title I or any of the funds associated with that application. And there are a few additional items. This is just a reminder, but there are a few additional items that have to be completed before the funds are released. So I'm going to go back to the I'm going to go back to that federal programs page that we were just on, because there's a statement there that kind of explains what those requirements are. And so it's right here with this note. The release of New Year funds is contingent upon district funding assurances completed in GMAP, district funding assurances statement uploaded in GMAP by the superintendent, not the designee, the federal cash request statement of assurances uploaded in GMAP, and as Brenda and David have talked about, the approved GMAP application. So just so that you're aware of that, and that's a good reminder for everybody too. And while we're on this page, I also want to remind you that your FY21 grant awards are going to be posted here. We've talked about these in previous webinars. I just love these award notifications. They have so much helpful information on them. So here's Title I Part A, and this would be your school year 1920 funds. And I just want to pull this up, see if I can make it a little bit bigger so you can see that a little bit easier. Well, where is it there? Maybe not. Wait, let's see. There we go. This has a lot of great information on it for you. It's got your, first of all, it's got your Munis project number. So we're talking about the F funds here. It talks about the award amount. It talks about the period of the award, which you really need to be aware of because you need to be keeping in mind those end dates. And then it talks about carryover, another important thing to be aware of. It talks about just some different information that it would be really good to keep close at hand for all your projects and to save these. And so all of the districts are right on this one form, just one right after the other in alphabetical order. So something else to be aware of and to keep in mind. All right, so I don't have any extra slides to share with you, but I do want to talk about a question that came in from a district after last month's webinar. If you recall, during that webinar, I talked some about family and parent engagement strategies that 2 of our districts have been using. They gave their permission for us to share those. If you have any that you would like to share, please be sure to email me or your consultant. We could highlight that during a newsletter or during another webinar as well. So this district that emailed asked us if we could possibly discuss allowable parent and family engagement activities. And since we've been talking about allowability during this webinar, that fits in very well here. So hopefully through that discussion, you have a little better understanding of allowability and what it takes to make a cost allowable in general. But in response to the district's request, I want to talk a little bit more about allowable activities as they specifically relate to parent and family engagement, since I think that's an area that a lot of districts sometimes have questions about. And so we'll start by taking a look at the KDE Title I Handbook, if I've still got that pulled up. Yeah, no, I got a different one pulled up. Another one I'm going to share with you. Here it is. Okay, so we see here that this is on page 23 or 24, let's see, 23. Okay, and it starts talking about the requirements around the parent and family engagement funds. And it says that I wanted to share this with you because it does start to lay out some things that are required activities and therefore things that you would want to include in your strategies and in your planning, and the funding would go possibly along with that as well. So we see that all districts here in this paragraph, whether they are required to reserve funds for parent and family engagement or not, must still implement the requirements in the statute. Okay. And it also says that in this sentence right here, so parents must be involved in the decisions as to how the parent and family engagement funds are allocated. And that is something that we monitor for. So make sure that we want to include parents and families in that decision-making process of how those funds would be spent. And so, of course, it doesn't mean that the parents are going to make the decision. You may have to work with them to make sure that what they want to do is allowable. For example, a few years ago, I was working with a district that had put a sizable amount of funding in the awards category. And if you pull up that funding matrix that we were looking at, you would see that it says that the awards could be allowable, could be an allowable expenditure, but you need to make sure that they're low cost and that they're educationally related. That's what it says in the matrix. And so when I asked the district for more information, they explained that they had asked the parents, which was a good thing, and the parents wanted to see their children receiving awards. So we just had some conversation then about, low cost awards, and the fact that you can get some certificates, a big pack of certificates for very inexpensively, even less than $10 for a large pack. So we had some conversation about that, and you might need to work with your parents through those kinds of conversations about, and that is a good thing because it helps them build their knowledge not only about what's allowable, but what Title I is all about. So it builds their Title I knowledge as well. In the next section of the parent and family, or of this same section on parent and family engagement, we're still on the Title I handbook here, but it talks about, over the next page or so, it talks about, you see this about the evidence-based activity. So it talks about, this actually should be A3D. Here, we'll need to make that revision in the handbook. It should be A3D, and it talks about the evidence-based activities and strategies consistent with the district parent and family engagement policy. And we actually went into some detail on the evidence-based activities in our January webinar, if you want to refer back to that. But it talks about how funds must be used for at least one of the following, and it lists these out. Now, there's not a lot of detail here, and I think this district was wanting some more examples of things that they could use the funds on, so we're going to get to that in just a minute, okay? But I want to point out this is nice because it just shows you the bare skeleton, like the organization and what exactly is in the Every Student Succeeds Act. This next section talks about, this is section 1116E, and it explains 1 through 5 are shalls. So the school and the district, all right, this is a district and school requirement, must do these activities and strategies right here. Okay, that's a shall. And then 6 through 13 gives some options. These things are optional that you might do if you wanted to, if it fit your context and your need. Of course, how to do these things is, that's getting a little bit deeper. And I think that's the kind of thing that this district was wanting to know. So I'm going to pull up another resource to share with you that actually does give you some of those specific activities. All right, so I'm going to pull up a resource that we have used in the past. That is a parent and family engagement handbook from Georgia. And I put the link to this on the slide, the last slide, so you can get to this. We have used it before, but this is an updated copy. And it's very long, so I don't want to scroll all the way back to the beginning to show you, although it's laid out very nicely. There's a nice table of contents, but just so I don't lose my place here, I'm going to leave it right here on this page. And what they do, and just trust me when I say there are dozens of pages that are like this, what they do is they take this section in ESSA. So right here, I'm going to take a look at the building capacity for involvement, since that's where I think a lot of our districts are focusing their efforts. And so to just answer the district's question and give you some specifics, we'll look at this section of the Every Student Succeeds Act 1116E, which is on building capacity for involvement. So what this resource does is they tell you if this is something at the district and or the school level. In this case, in E1, it is both. And it also will put the exact information that's from the Every Student Succeeds Act that you could go back and look at yourself. But let's just look at this one for an example. This one is providing information to parents. And so it's talking about each school and local educational agency that receives Title I funds shall provide assistance to parents of children served by the school or local educational agency as appropriate in understanding such topics as the challenging state academic standards, state and local academic assessments, the requirements of this part under the Every Student Succeeds Act, and how to monitor a child's progress and work with educators to improve the achievement of children. And so I'm going to scroll down in each of these sections. So there are pages that are just like this, and they take each section and they take each requirement, and then they give you some suggested documentation that you could keep. And notice there's a checkbox there. If you wanted to print it out, you could do that. And then what I really like is this is the part where it gets real specific. And they give you some ideas of ways that you could meet, of activities that you could actually do to meet compliance. And so here we see things just to meet compliance. You would need to put in your school parent and district parent and family engagement policies describing how parents will receive assistance in understanding the standards and so on. Provide parents with information about the standards. Offer opportunities for them to learn about state and local assessments. And educate parents about how to monitor their child's progress and how to work with educators. And then there's some innovative ideas, some things that maybe ramp it up just a little bit. So engaging parents in the development of educational classes for each grade level designed to help parents understand the corresponding subjects and assessments. Gathering feedback to understand parents to determine parents' understanding of the standards and school curriculum so that the school can provide necessary resources and materials. And then over here in the exceptional column, you see somebody who's really taken off with it and done something exceptional. And of course, there are all different levels of implementation. So hopefully if they do one of these, it will be exceptional. And so, I mean, to develop and encourage parent leaders who have received the training to teach the classes to other parents to learn more about the required academic topics. These are some things that just ideas, just possibilities, certainly nothing that you have to do, but something that you might be interested in doing if you're looking for some other ways beyond what you've already done. Now, there's another one I want to show you, and it was the very next one. I think I might have lost my place here. We were on E1. Well, I have lost my place. We were on E1, I think. There we go. Okay, so I wanted to show you the next one. And like I said, there are lots of pages of this. We won't be going all the way through it, but you will have the link so you can go back and look at as much as you want. And so to E2, this one is building capacity for involvement again, but a lot of districts, I think, do a lot of providing materials and training for parents. So I wanted to show you this one in case you're looking for some other ideas. Again, district and school level. And it says shall provide materials and training to help parents to work with their children to improve their children's achievement, such as literacy training and using technology. I think we have a lot of districts doing these kinds of things. Of course, using technology becoming even more important now during the school closures and so on. And this, I just want to make an aside here. I was on a webinar yesterday, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of English Language Acquisition. They did a great webinar on English learners during distance learning, and they were talking about how, and I'd heard this before, that some parents aren't sure how to use the technology or how to access the resources. So some districts on that call had talked about how they had made videos, training videos for parents in different languages on how to start from turning on the computer all the way up to how to access the learning materials and so on, and how to submit homework and so on. And then they posted those videos on their website. So there's lots of ideas out there. Again, so this explains the requirement. Then it gives you some ideas on what you would do, or some possible ways to meet the compliance, and what could be some ideas for an innovative implementation, and then what would really ramp it up to exceptional. So I hope that has helped to answer the district question. I've been hearing lots of things coming through on my phone. I'm not sure if these are I think some of them are questions about the webinar. Let me see if we can answer some of these. This one says, David, this one might be a question for you, and it might be one we need to follow up with as well. It says we have funding assurances are not due with application deadline. Correct. I think that's correct. Is it not? David, do you know?
I do not know, but it should be posted on the homepage of GMAP.
Okay. When the funding assurances are due?
Yeah, when they are due, yes.
Okay, on the homepage of GMAP. Okay, that's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that might be the only question we've got, but we will follow up for sure with that question as well, in case you do, because in case any of you do have new superintendents and or maybe in the process of that. So that's a very good question, and we can follow up on that one. Okay, I don't see any other questions, and let me see if I had anything else I wanted to share with you. Oh, I just wanted to summarize that. To remember that parents should have a say in deciding how parent and family engagement funds will be spent. You'll want to keep documentation that they did have the opportunity to provide their feedback in that process. Check the funding matrix to see if there are any special conditions or notes on using a particular code. But of course, as we said, that funding matrix is just one of those aspects that you would use when you're trying to determine if something's allowable. Follow your district's allowability process to determine if a particular expenditure is allowable. And if you're still not sure, always please feel free to reach out to your consultant and to talk that through. I think that that is all I have. We continue to check the survey results and provide that link to you if you have any feedback you would like to provide. And if you have any questions, be sure to let us know. And David, Jennifer, David and Brenda, do you have anything else to add?
I checked the GMAP homepage. It doesn't look like those notices are posted there, so we'll probably have to follow up with Thelma or somebody else on that.
We'll follow up. Thank you, David. Thanks for checking, and we will definitely follow up with that. That was a good question. All right. If there's nothing else, then we will call it a day and hopefully see you on next month's webinar. Thank you.